This week, we're going to be talking about inventors, inventions, and discrimination in the workplace. The first section is all about inventors and changing the world. If you want to refer to this in your textbook, you can read pages 388 to 391. The lesson essential question is, how did new inventions and technologies further the Industrial Revolution? The ultimate change. The biggest change was from an economy based on agriculture and trade to one based on the production of manufactured goods. What are manufactured goods? To manufacture something means to make something on a large scale, like in a factory with machinery. And then goods are items that people can use in their lives. What is needed to manufacture goods? Raw materials, workers, equipment, and technology to actually create the goods. But economists say that these are the items that are needed for production: land, labor, that means people actually doing the working, capital, which means money, and technology. Now, often when we think of technology, we think of our iPads or iPods or televisions or something like that. But really, technology is just new ideas and new equipment that make life easier. The Transcontinental Railroad, which we've talked about earlier in the year, paved the way for these goods to be shipped across the continent and sold to other markets. The first example of this are grains. Grains were shipped from the Great Plains to giant mills and became cereal for people to eat across America. Hogs and cattle were shipped to meat processing plants, and iron ore was shipped to processing plants where it was converted to something called steel. The steel was used to build more railroads, skyscrapers, and bridges all across the United States. Entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who come up with different business ideas. The first example of this was a man named Andrew Carnegie. He brought the Bessemer process, which was a way of converting iron into steel, to the United States. His company was called Carnegie Steel, and it built huge steel factories all across the United States. He had a monopoly on the production of steel, which meant that he had the majority on producing steel in the United States. Henry Ford, who you might have already heard of, created the first assembly line for the production of automobiles in the year 1913. That was about 105 years ago. The second section is all about inventors that changed the world. Our essential question is, how did new inventions and technologies further the Industrial Revolution? The first invention is the telegraph, and you'll see a picture of it here on the right. This was invented by a guy named Samuel Morse in 1848. It was a great way to help railroads communicate, stay on schedule, and prevent accidents so that they would know when different trains were coming at different times. Soon after that, it was used to place orders for goods using something called Morse code to ensure that both raw materials and finished products were delivered to the right place at the right time. The telephone, which we all use daily, was invented by a man named Alexander Graham Bell in the year 1876. This greatly improved communication. Businesses could communicate quicker and easier. Soon, all of the wealthy people, the people who had money, also had telephones. It was a lot easier to use than the telegraph because didn't have to learn a new system of communicating like the Morse code that instead of using words, used dashes and dots to communicate those words. The light bulb. Often, we say that Thomas Edison is the one who invented the light bulb. That's actually a myth. It was not invented by Thomas Edison, but he greatly improved it and then invented the incandescent light bulb in 1879. It made lighting factories and homes safer than kerosene lamps because these kerosene lamps would often catch fire. It made the use of electricity popular. Therefore, electric generators were built in 1881 and electric lines were strung in the cities and towns. Speaking of electricity, electricity provided a new way to power manufacturing plants, but it also helped with the growth of transportation. Electric powered streetcars, which you can see a picture in the middle of your screen, made it possible for people to move to the outskirts of the busy cities to live and commute to work by this streetcar. Electricity also led to the invention of other labor saving devices, such as the washing machine and the vacuum cleaner. These made life easier for families who could afford them. Women in the workplace. Before the Industrial Revolution, women mostly worked in the home where they would raise children, clean, cook, sew, etc. But with the invention of the telephone, operators were needed to work the switchboard, which basically would connect two people to talk over one phone line. Most of these operators were women. The invention of the sewing machine gave women an opportunity to work in factories where clothing was made. The invention of the typewriter also gave women new job opportunities in offices. Section 3 is all about discrimination during industrialization. We've talked a lot about discrimination against Native Americans, but today we're going to focus on discrimination of African Americans during the Industrial Revolution. The Jim Crow laws came about during this time. They were similar to the black codes that you talked about during the Reconstruction. They were designed to keep races socially separated and to keep African Americans in a position of social inferiority, meaning that they wanted to keep whites higher than the African Americans. Something called segregation, which is setting people apart based on their race or religion, had grown in the South since federal troops left at the end of the Reconstruction. The Jim Crow laws called for separate facilities for African Americans in schools, neighborhoods, theaters, on trains, and everyone else. And as you can see in these pictures right here at the bottom of your screen, here's one for a laundry facility, here's one for a swimming pool, and here's one for a theater. They were labeled either white or colored people and would show people who could enter that facility. Signs like this one were located in most places, telling people where whites could go and where African Americans could go. We've already studied a little bit about amendments this year. This was a violation of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court ruled in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson that separate facilities were legal as long as the facilities were equal. So the phrase separate but equal was a part of the South for many years, well into the 1960s. The separate part was enforced. Many different places were separated based on race or religion, but the equal part, not so much. Most people ignored it.